Bavaria, Germany, May 1945. Oberst Kurt Eisenberg sat in the courtyard of an American POW camp, surrounded by thousands of other captured Wehrmacht officers. The war was over. Germany had surrendered. Hitler was dead. An American officer, a major from intelligence, approached with a clipboard. Oberst Eisenberg, 116th Panzer Division? Yes. I need to ask you some questions about the Ardennes offensive. The major sat down across from him. For our after-action reports, when did you realize Germany would lose the war? Eisenberg thought for a moment. Not when Berlin fell, not when the Allies crossed the Rhine, not even when D-Day succeeded. December 19, 1944, near Stavelot, a fuel depot. The major looked puzzled. A fuel depot, not a battle. Not a battle, Eisenberg confirmed. A captured American supply dump. 50,000 gallons of gasoline just abandoned. I don't understand. Wasn't capturing fuel good for you? Your forces had fuel shortages. Eisenberg smiled without humor. That's exactly why it was the end. When I saw how much fuel you could afford to leave behind, I understood. We weren't fighting a war. We were fighting mathematics, and mathematics doesn't care about courage. Part 1. Berlin, September 1939. Major Kurt Eisenberg stood in the conference room at Wehrmacht High Command, watching generals spread maps across a table. Poland would fall within 6 weeks. Everyone knew it. The question wasn't whether Germany would win, but how quickly. General von Rundstedt pointed to the invasion routes. 3 army groups, 40 divisions, will encircle Warsaw within 10 days. Logistics? Eisenberg asked. He was there as an observer, a rising officer being groomed for higher command. Adequate, our mechanized units can move faster than Polish forces can respond. And fuel supplies? Von Rundstedt looked annoyed. Why does a major ask about fuel? Because tanks don't fight without it, sir. We have Romanian oil and synthetic production, sufficient for a short war. That phrase stuck with Eisenberg, a short war. Everything German planning assumed victory would come quickly, because a long war meant resources Germany didn't have. He kept his mouth shut, but the mathematics bothered him. Germany consumed oil. It didn't produce enough. The entire strategy rested on winning before running out. Later, Eisenberg's mentor, General Beck, who had quietly opposed the invasion, found him smoking in a hallway. You're thinking too much, Kurt. The fuel calculations don't work for a long war. I know, but this won't be a long war. Hitler says so. Beck's tone carried bitter irony. And if it becomes a long war, fuel will be the least of our problems. Beck was right. The war became long, and fuel became exactly the problem. Part 2, Eastern Front, November 1942. Oberst Eisenberg, now commanding a panzer battalion of the 116th Panzer Division, sat in a knocked-out Soviet factory watching his fuel officer calculate remaining supplies. Herr Oberst, we have fuel for approximately 80 kilometers of movement, maybe less if we encounter heavy resistance. They were 50 kilometers from Stalingrad. The great offensive had ground to a halt, not because of Soviet resistance, though that was fierce, but because supply lines stretched across 2,000 kilometers of Russian steppe couldn't deliver enough fuel. Eisenberg's 40 Panthers and Panzer Fries sat motionless. Perfect mechanical condition, empty tanks. Russian winter was approaching, temperature dropping, and the German army was stuck because trucks carrying fuel couldn't reach them through partisan attacks and impossible roads. Major Hoffman, his executive officer, approached. Orders from division, hold position, await resupply. When? 3 days, maybe 4. The Soviets won't wait 3 days. I know. That night, Soviet forces counterattacked, not with tanks, with infantry exploiting the fact that German panzers couldn't move. Eisenberg's battalion fought from static positions, using tanks as pillboxes instead of mobile weapons. They held, barely. But Eisenberg learned a lesson. The world's best tank is worthless without fuel, and Germany was running out. When fuel finally arrived, Eisenberg calculated consumption rates. His battalion used 3,000 liters per day during active operations. Germany's total synthetic fuel production was roughly 5 million liters per day for the entire Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, and Kriegsmarine. Simple mathematics. Germany's war machine consumed more fuel than it produced. The deficit was covered by Romanian oil fields. But what happened when those were lost? Part 3. Kursk, July 1943. The Battle of Kursk was supposed to be Germany's grand counterstroke on the Eastern Front. Operation Citadel. Nearly 3,000 tanks and assault guns smashing through Soviet defenses. Eisenberg's battalion participated in the southern pincer. The attack began well. German forces penetrated Soviet lines, destroyed hundreds of Russian tanks. Then fuel became an issue. Again. On the third day, Eisenberg received orders to halt and await fuel trucks. His Panthers sat idle for 6 hours while supply vehicles struggled through traffic jams and Soviet artillery fire. 6 hours. In mobile warfare, 6 hours meant the enemy repositioned, reinforced, and prepared counterattacks. When fuel arrived, the advance resumed. But momentum was lost. The Soviets had figured out German logistics vulnerabilities. They didn't need to destroy German tanks in combat. They just needed to disrupt fuel convoys. After 2 weeks, Operation Citadel was abandoned. Not because German forces couldn't break through, they could, but because losses in men and material, combined with fuel shortages, made further advance impossible. Eisenberg's battalion had started Kursk with 42 tanks, ended with 19. Of the 23 losses, 8 were combat casualties. 15 were abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel shortages. He documented this in his after-action report. Recommendation: future operations must account for fuel consumption as primary limiting factor. Tactical success means nothing if vehicles cannot be sustained. The report went up the chain. Nothing changed, because Germany didn't have more fuel to allocate. Part 4. France, August 1944. Eisenberg, now commanding a panzer regiment, experienced German logistics from the opposite side. The Allies had landed at Normandy and broken out. German forces were retreating across France. The retreat was chaos, not because of Allied pressure, though that was intense, but because German units were destroying their own vehicles. Fuel trucks couldn't escape fast enough. Tanks ran out of fuel. Rather than leave them for the Allies, crews disabled and abandoned them. Eisenberg personally supervised the destruction of 12 Panthers on August 15th near Argentan. Perfect condition, no battle damage, just empty fuel tanks and no prospect of resupply. Light the charges, he ordered. The tanks exploded. Thousands of man-hours of manufacturing, precision engineering, hundreds of tons of scarce steel, destroyed because there wasn't diesel to move them 50 kilometers. Major Hoffman watched the flames. "This is insane. This is mathematics," Eisenberg replied. "We're burning our own army because we can't fuel it." After France, what remained of Eisenberg's regiment was pulled back to Germany to refit. The 116th Panzer Division had been effectively destroyed, but Germany's war production was still functional. New tanks arrived. New crews were trained. Everything except fuel. Part 5. December 16th, 1944. Ardennes offensive begins. Eisenberg, now fully promoted to Oberst, commanded Kampfgruppe Eisenberg, a reinforced battle group of the 116th Panzer Division. 60 tanks supporting infantry, engineers, and artillery. Assigned objective: break through American lines, cross the Meuse River, drive to Antwerp. He attended the final briefing on December 15th. The plan was audacious. Germany's last reserves, 20 divisions, would smash through the thinly held Ardennes sector, split Allied forces, capture Antwerp, force a negotiated peace. The operations officer outlined the fuel situation. Each division has sufficient fuel for approximately 100 kilometers of movement. Additional supplies will come from captured American dumps. Eisenberg's hand went up. What if we don't capture American supplies? Then the offensive stops, but intelligence confirms Americans have massive fuel reserves throughout the sector. We'll capture what we need. The answer wasn't reassuring. The entire operation depended on stealing enemy fuel. That wasn't a logistics plan. That was gambling. But Germany was out of options. The Soviets were approaching from the east, the Western Allies from the west. This offensive was desperation. Eisenberg knew it. Everyone knew it. The attack began December 16th at 05:30. Artillery barrage, then panzer assault. American lines crumbled, surprised, undermanned. The Americans retreated in confusion. For 2 days, Eisenberg's battle group advanced rapidly, 20 kilometers the first day, 30 the second. It felt like 1940 again, German armor slicing through enemy positions. But fuel consumption was brutal. Panthers used 3 liters per kilometer. 60 tanks moving 30 kilometers consumed 5,400 liters. Support vehicles used another 3,000. Daily consumption, 8,000, 10,000 liters. By December 18th, Eisenberg's fuel reserves were at 40%. He radioed division, request immediate resupply. Response, fuel convoys delayed by traffic and Allied air attacks. Continue advance, capture American supplies. So Eisenberg continued, because orders were orders. Part 6, December 19th, 1944. The Revelation Kampfgruppe. Eisenberg reached Stavelot on the morning of December 19th after fierce fighting. American forces retreated so quickly they abandoned equipment, ammunition, and, critically, a fuel depot. Eisenberg's reconnaissance company secured the depot at 10:15 hours. The report came over radio. Fuel depot captured intact, massive quantities. Eisenberg drove forward personally. He needed to see what massive meant. The depot was in a forest clearing south of town. Hundreds of 55-gallon drums, neatly stacked and labeled. American soldiers had fled without destroying them. Eisenberg's supply officer, Hauptmann Schmidt, was already counting. Herr Oberst, preliminary estimate, 50,000 gallons, maybe more. 50,000 gallons. Eisenberg did the conversion automatically. 1 gallon equals 3.785 liters. 50,000 gallons equals approximately 189,000 liters. His battle group consumed 10,000 liters per day. This depot contained enough fuel for 19 days of operations, for one battle group. Herr Oberst, this is incredible. Schmidt was ecstatic. We can continue the offensive. We can... Wait. Eisenberg held up a hand. He was thinking. This was an American divisional supply dump. One division. The Americans had multiple divisions in this sector, which meant multiple depots like this. The Americans had abandoned 189,000 liters without even considering it a significant loss. Eisenberg thought about German fuel production. In December 1944, after Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants, Germany produced approximately 150,000 tons of fuel per month for the entire military. That was roughly 180 million liters monthly, about 6 million liters daily, for the entire Wehrmacht, Luftwaffe, Kriegsmarine, and transport network. This single American depot, abandoned as negligible, represented over 3% of Germany's daily total production. The Americans had thrown away what would take Germany an entire day to produce. Schmidt, how many depots like this do you think the Americans have? I don't know, Herr Oberst. 10, 20? Eisenberg laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Thousands. They have thousands. What? The Americans produce more oil than we can imagine. They're wasteful with it because they have so much they can afford to be wasteful. Eisenberg sat down on a fuel drum. His legs felt weak. He'd spent 5 years fighting a war he'd thought Germany could win through superior tactics and technology. But tactics didn't matter when the enemy could field 10 tanks for every one you destroyed. Technology didn't matter when the enemy could build replacement aircraft faster than you could shoot them down. And logistics didn't matter when the enemy had infinite resources. Herr Oberst, are you well? Eisenberg looked at Major Hoffman, who had arrived from the command vehicle. Do you know what the Americans call this? A fuel depot? No, they call it expendable, because they have so much. Losing this means nothing. He stood and walked among the fuel drums. Germany's synthetic fuel production, 6 million liters per day. America's petroleum production, 900 million liters per day. Hoffman stared. That can't be right. It is. I've seen the intelligence estimates. We just didn't believe them because the numbers were too absurd. America produces as much fuel in one day as Germany produces in 5 months. But we're still fighting. We're still fighting a war we already lost. We lost it in 1939 when we invaded Poland. We lost it mathematically. Eisenberg kicked a fuel drum. This depot proves it. An enemy that can abandon this much fuel isn't an enemy we can defeat through military force, because they replace losses faster than we can inflict them. Part 7, December 24, 1944, reality sets. In the captured fuel at Stavelot kept Eisenberg's battle group mobile for 3 more days, but the offensive was failing. Not because German soldiers weren't fighting hard, not because American resistance was overwhelming, because German logistics couldn't sustain offensive operations. By Christmas Eve, most German panzer divisions were immobilized due to fuel shortages. Traffic jams on narrow Ardennes roads prevented supply trucks from reaching the front. Allied aircraft, once weather-cleared, destroyed fuel convoys. Eisenberg's battle group was down to 20% fuel capacity. His 60 tanks were reduced to 38 operational, the rest abandoned or destroyed. Orders came through on December 24th. Hold position, prepare for defensive operations. The offensive was over. Germany had advanced 60 kilometers at the deepest penetration, 100 kilometers short of the Meuse River, 250 kilometers short of Antwerp. They'd gambled everything on capturing Allied fuel. They'd captured some, not enough. Eisenberg gathered his officers on Christmas Eve. They sat in a bombed-out farmhouse, exhausted. Gentlemen, the offensive has failed. We'll transition to defense tomorrow. Silence. Sir, Hoffman asked quietly, what happens now? Now? The Soviets attack from the east. The Americans attack from the west. Germany runs out of men, fuel, and time. Eisenberg pulled out a small notebook where he'd been tracking fuel consumption. I've kept detailed records. We used 247,000 liters of fuel in 8 days. German daily production for the entire military is 6 million liters. 25 divisions participated in this offensive. If each consumed fuel at our rate, the offensive used 6.2 million liters per day, more than Germany's total production. We cannibalized our own sustainability, Hoffman said. Exactly. This offensive consumed fuel that should have been used for defensive operations. When the Allies counterattack, we won't have fuel to maneuver. We'll be static targets. Then why did we attack? Eisenberg closed the notebook. Because Hitler believed will could overcome mathematics. Because the alternative was admitting defeat. Because humans do irrational things when they're desperate. Part Part 8, January 1945, Retreat. The American counteroffensive began after Christmas. By mid-January, German forces were retreating back to their start lines. Eisenberg's remaining tanks, 18 Panthers, ran out of fuel on January 12th. He radioed for resupply. None came. "Destroy the vehicles," he ordered. For the third time in the war, Eisenberg watched German tanks explode because there wasn't fuel to move them. Perfect machines, trained crews, destroyed by arithmetic. The retreat continued on foot. Eisenberg's battle group, once 3,000 men with 60 tanks, was now 800 men with no vehicles. They reached German lines on January 20th. What remained of the 116th Panzer Division was dissolved. Eisenberg was reassigned to defensive operations in the Rhineland. By April, Germany was collapsing. Soviet forces entered Berlin. American forces crossed the Elbe. Eisenberg surrendered to American troops on May 7th, the day before VE Day. Epilogue: Bavaria, POW camp, June 1945. The American intelligence major finished taking notes. "So you're saying you knew Germany would lose in December 1944? "I knew Germany would lose in September 1939, Eisenberg corrected, but I didn't accept it until December 1944, until I saw how much fuel America could afford to waste." "Why didn't Germany surrender earlier? Save lives?" Eisenberg thought about the question. "Because soldiers don't control those decisions. Politicians do. And politicians don't think in terms of fuel production rates and logistical sustainability. They think in terms of ideology and willpower." "Did you believe in the war, in Hitler?" "I believed in Germany. I believed in my duty as a soldier. Whether I believed in Hitler..." Eisenberg shrugged. "That became irrelevant somewhere around Stalingrad. By 1944, belief didn't matter. Only mathematics mattered." The major stood to leave, then paused. "One more question. If you could go back to 1939, knowing what you know now, what would you change?" Eisenberg laughed. "Nothing, because I was a major. Majors don't decide national policy. But if I could go back as someone with authority..." He pulled out his notebook, now worn and stained. "I'd show Hitler these numbers. Daily fuel production versus daily consumption. Then I'd show him American oil production capacity. Then I'd say, 'Mein Führer, we cannot win a war of attrition against an enemy that produces 150 times more fuel than we do. Mathematics doesn't care about ideology.'" Would he have listened? No. That's why the war happened. The major left. Eisenberg sat alone with his notebook, looking at 5 years of meticulously recorded fuel calculations. Every depot captured, every tank abandoned, every operation canceled due to shortages. The history of Germany's defeat, written in liters and kilometers. Someone once said, "Wars are won by logistics." Eisenberg disagreed. Wars are won by production capacity. Everything else, courage, tactics, technology, is secondary to the question, can you sustain operations longer than the enemy? Germany couldn't. The writing was on the wall from the beginning, but humans are optimists. They believe will can overcome mathematics. It can't. Eisenberg learned that watching 50,000 gallons of American fuel sitting in a Belgian forest, fuel the Americans didn't even miss, that was the moment he understood. Germany was fighting not an army, but an industrial system that could replace losses infinitely. You can't kill an industrial system with tanks and soldiers. You could only deplete yourself trying. And Germany had.